Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is our first hangout, Cafe Pellicola Live. My name is Shlomi Ron. I'm a co-founder at Italian cinema blog cafepellicola.com, and we're very excited today to have a very special guest, Professor Pasquale Verdicchio from the University of California in San Diego. Before I introduce Pasquale, I'd like to say a few words about our blog. The blog pellicola.com was launched 7 years ago back in San Diego with Laura Bianconcini. Laura, say hi.
Hi.
And we were basically part of the Italian community culture in San Diego, and it was a very exciting times back then. I was a student taking the Italian language classes, and this blog evolved from that experience. Today what we're doing is really covering a lot of film reviews on the blog. We also run occasional mini film festivals. I'm based in New York, and Laura in San Diego. And today we have Professor Pasquale Verdicchio in Vancouver, I'm guessing, right?
Vancouver, right, in Canada, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a kind of a triangle conference, which is really cool. So a few words about Professor Verdicchio. So Professor Verdicchio has taught courses in literature, film, and writing in the Department of Literature at the University of California in San Diego since 1986. He is considered a leading translator of major Italian writers. He has Englished the work of Pasolini, Marini, Caproni, Porta, and Gramsci, among others. His poetry, reviews, criticism, and photography have been published in journals around the world. And if that's not enough, he's also been a founding member and past president of the Association of Italian Canadian Writer, and a founder and associate director of the San Diego Italian Film Festival. We are so much delighted to have him tonight. And before we get started, I'd like to let you know how this online interview is going to work. So if you click on the left side of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. You'll see an option to submit questions during the online interview. There are already 3 questions that we received from viewers and some of our followers. So we're going to start with the questions that you see on the right side, but you really feel free to submit your own questions using the Q&A feature on the right side of the screen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura to start with the first question that I'm selecting right now.
Okay. Pasquale, first of all, thank you for attending our interview here, first interview at Cafe Pellicola Live.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you. So as a first question is, as a native of Naples, what was your first exposure to Italian cinema? And what did you like best growing up in Naples during the 60s? And what were your favorite films back in that time? And why?
Well, it seems that I got to see a lot of films during that time, even as a very young child, I would say, wandering all over the city. My mother didn't know that, but and it so happened that my uncle was a carabiniere, and he used to get free passes for movies. So I got to see all the big, all the spaghetti westerns. I got to see Mondo Cane, which for a child looking up at this movie was kind of puzzling at the time, of course. And spent hours and days in the theaters. So just, I think it was a mishmash of all sorts of things, of the so-called sand and sandal movies, Hercules, all the Totò movies, all the westerns that were coming out. It was so much of a mishmash that sometimes it was hard to keep things clear in my head, and I think that stayed with me somehow. But you know, some of the movies that really tended to stay with me were the ones that I also saw on television, which at the time was very limited because we only had two channels, Rai Uno and Rai Due. And if I remember right, I think the films were played on Thursday night. It was either Thursday or Tuesday. And so a lot of times they were American films. There are two films that, and so on. I'm talking about American films rather than Italian films. But two films that had a lot of impact on me, and it was probably because they matched the melodramatic life of Naples on the streets and in the home. And I actually didn't find out what those films were until almost decades later, but really left an impression on me were Night of the Iguana and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. That's just to give you some of the other background. You know, again, as a very young child, all those films seemed to integrate really well into all the other stuff that I was watching. But of course, there were also the classics: Bicycle Thieves, Roma Città Aperta, Miracolo Milano, all those that would show on television, and that got to see pieces of every now and then.
But do you have any particular Italian movie that at that time really made you, I don't know, think, oh, that's really great, and then you keep it as a, you know, a masterpiece on your, also you kept it as masterpiece on your career, like just teaching?
Yeah, the ones that I mentioned, the three that I mentioned, and now I'm talking about the sort of impression that they would leave on a child. Bicycle Thieves, Aperta, and Miracolo Milano, especially because of the scene of the flying people flying around the brooms.
Yeah.
You know? So, sort of the impression that they left on a child. And those films, the first two, have stayed with me through all these years, and in fact, I show them every year in my Italian film course to begin the course. Roma Città Aperta, Rome Open City, and Bicycle Thieves. And it's great to go back and look at those after decades and still find them really fresh. There's always something new that pops up, I think. Even as we move on and with the new Italian films, you see, of course, the intertextuality and this dialogue back with a certain tradition. For example, it's not a new film, but Ladri di Saponette, Nichetti's film. I don't know what the translation in English was for that film.
The Soap Thieves.
What was it called?
I'm just wondering if it's like the Soap Thieves.
No, it was something else. It was less literal, and it didn't make any sense because it didn't refer to the title of Ladri di Biciclette. But and today, of course, there's the trends are moving again to reconsider neorealism as a fount. I'd like to mention one film that I just saw last year, 2 years ago maybe. It's a film by a Neapolitan filmmaker, Antonietta De Lillo, and the title is O Cinema. And it's about, and it really, when I saw it, it reminded me of myself. I was a young boy, probably 8 or 9 at the most, walking around Naples, looking around and thinking about relating the sights that he sees on the street to the films that he's seen, and going to the cinema and watching films. And it's set in the 60s, so it really corresponds to some of my experiences. Unfortunately, it's a very hard document. It's a sort of mockumentary, but it's a hard film to find. But it's an excellent film to sort of give context of cinema at that time, and probably Antonietta De Lillo. Maybe she's younger than I am. I'm not sure, but probably experienced cinema in the same manner, and that's probably something that took her to making films. Anyway, that's cinema was just a large part of my life. It was really an everyday thing, and attended constantly, and facilitated by my uncle giving us free tickets.
Question out of the program. Sorry, Shlomo, just.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely conversational. Don't feel bad.
Pasquale, which one you first? What age? How old were you when you first saw one movie and you said, "Oh, this is another world"?
Yeah, I think it was probably 6. I was probably 6 years old. And at the Cinema America, down by the stadium, and I would walk around with my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, and that's why I said my mother knew nothing about it, but we'd walk all over the place, and go into the movies, even at that young age.
Wow.
The fascination was just this huge screen. Of course, we always sat in the front row, and so this huge screen where everything was really larger than life, and to see these stories play out. John Ford westerns, The King of Kings, as I said, Mondo Cane.
That must have been very fascinating, also because, as you said, the TV was not so much available at that time.
Yeah.
So even seeing this huge screen must have been fascinating itself.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
Nice, good. Shlomi, please go ahead.
Yeah, just listening to you describe this, it kind of came to my mind without really, trivializing it. But the Cinema Paradiso experience of the early years, from the child's perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly.
Very much like that, and added to that was the fact that the adventure involved in going to one theater that was up the hill in the Vomero, and another theater that was downtown, so we had to take the funicolare or the bus, or find somebody to take us down on a Vespa. So there's a whole other adventure that was in itself a movie script that went along with that, because then when we get home, people would say, "Your mother has been calling you for hours."
That's so cool.
And you are such a little boy, no?
Yeah. It was great.
Cute.
Beautiful. All right. So now that we kind of probed a little bit deeper into your past, I want to kind of fast forward to the present. And basically, when we look at Italian cinema today, we hear in the news a lot of issues, with the challenges to fund new movies. We hear about the dire straits of Cinecittà Studios outside Rome. The fact that most of the productions today, it's not really 100% Italian. It's always a French, European, German, combinations to make a film.
Right.
And the question I'm having here, which is just a stat that I found that I thought is really telling, with the recent 27% drop in Italian film investment in 2013, do you see any impact on the artistic integrity of Italian cinema, in a sense that since it's so hard to make films in Italy today, do film directors film under constraints to abide to a specific artistic style in order to get the funding they need? Or what do you see in general, the major trends despite these economic challenges? I threw in here this buzzword, post-neorealism, just because, we start seeing a lot of films that talk about, kind of the same ingredients of the neorealism back after World War II. Talking about social issues. If you look at Soldini's film, Days and Clouds, people out of work, immigration with Terra Firma. So I'm kind of trying to get a sense, if this social mirror is actually a reflection of, one, what's happening, and two, the challenges economically to produce films.
Yeah, I think both. The drop in investments is probably due to the fact that a lot of filmmakers started working internationally. Starting with Cinema Paradiso, a lot of filmmakers have found also a way to work into North American collaborations. Some were offered contracts after their film tended to do well in the U.S. And some producers tended to step back from funding film in Italy itself. I don't think those collaborations have hurt at all. I think they've in fact enriched and are going towards creating a European film, just like the European reality now is much different than it was before, when neorealism was kind of emerging. The other effect, of course, is also that of production and distribution houses, which have been controlled to a great extent by a very limited number of people. The example that everyone tends to use is Berlusconi, but of course he wasn't the only one doing that. It didn't make a difference that he did control so much. But that too, I think, rather than seeing it as a negative, I think it had a positive effect because along with the emergence of new technologies, it may be forced, but it enabled people to explore new venues of expressing through film media, different types, video, digital film. So I think, in fact, that Italian film is, despite what some might say it's dying or it's dead even.
Yeah.
But I think it's going through a good season because there's a lot of exploration of the possibilities, and there's less dependence on production houses that might only want to see films produced that have a commercial future. That, of course, would dilute the experimentation and any possible exploration of it. There was some concern that films in the 90s, something that started in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, when Berlusconi did begin to introduce private television and importing a lot of old American programs of flooding the television, private television, with really, mediocre materials or of his own production, mostly variety shows. That have had, I think, a strong influence in brainwashing people as to what culture might be. And so I think Italian culture did lose a bit of ground because, first of all, of the fascination with American culture on the one hand, and a fascination with entertainment culture that was very superficial through these variety shows. So apparently, the production of more meaningful films dropped by the wayside. But those, even though maybe it was reduced in number, there were still many that were produced during that period. We can't say that no good films came out in the 80s and 90s. A lot of good films developed out of that. Of course, Cinema Paradiso being 89 marks a transition of a revival of that. I think a lot of filmmakers today, though they might be smaller in production capabilities, definitely in distribution, are making some excellent films. Just recently, I presented a few films, current films from the 90s and early 2000s, some by Vincenzo Marra, who's again a Neapolitan filmmaker. I apologize if I keep referring to Neapolitans.
No worries.
Vincenzo Marra, I couldn't find one of his films. I finally found that it was produced as a DVD in France, but it's not produced as a DVD either in Italy or in the U.S. And it's representative of a new style of filmmaking that some have called neo-neorealism. It's representative of the type of film that's more engaged, and that was the worry, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that no one was making engaged films anymore. But Vincenzo Marra Garrone himself made some documentaries that were very much engaged. Of course, Nanni Moretti has always been very engaged, someone like him. And then we have some of the old filmmakers that through that period were still making films. Rossi, for example.
Even Ermanno Olmi, one of my favorite filmmakers.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the old masters were still very active. And so I think they, having dropped out of the more commercial type of filmmaking or something, historically it was also that transition period. Italy was no longer a poor country emerging the post-war period. So maybe the issues that film treated weren't as much of interest to I think I'm talking about a North American audience, and I think you can sort of tell that North American audiences seem to be primarily interested in Italian films that tended to continue to represent Italy and Italians under a certain image, more very stereotypical type of image, and I think Cinema Paradiso in a sense falls into that. La Grande Bellezza, Great Beauty, of course, undermines what I just said. Right?
Yeah.
I was at a conference on neorealism in Parma last, I think it was October, November, and I was interviewed, and I said, "Oh no, La Grande Bellezza is not going to win because it doesn't fall into the stereotypes that Americans like." And of course, I was
you see, that was
I'm
a
glad
big
I was
surprise.
It was a huge tribute to Fellini and all the great.
Well, maybe there is some of that still in there. So
yeah,
and people who have written about it tend to refer to Fellini.
Well, I was going to jump in and ask you this question, of course, out the program as usual. So, and just talking about the recent film, what do you think about the Great Beauty, the La Grande Bellezza, you yourself? What do you think about this movie?
I like the film very much. I don't think it's Fellini at all. I think it's part of a new trend in Italian cinema that we keep wanting to say neorealism, and of course, if it was Fellini, it wouldn't be neorealism. And I think it's a transition period for Italian cinema. I really liked La Grande Bellezza. I really liked Reality, for example, which is another transition piece. They're pieces that straddle reality and fantasy, and I think they're attempting to find a way through La Crisi, which seems to be eternal in Italy, but it's really being felt now. I mean, we're really going through a crisis, and I think finally everyone is going through the crisis, except the politicians, it seems. But I think these films speak to that crisis, to the question of what is real, what is beautiful, what is grande. What do these things mean? All these qualifiers. And reality, of course, refers to reality television, but only in part. It also refers to the day-to-day reality that people are living, which isn't really definable. And I think in the post-60s up until late 90s, early 2000s, people were attempting to define reality in a very specific way, which was through the escapist television. Once the bottom fell out of that, in the crisis that we have today, then we have to begin to explore what reality is for each one of us, for the population at large, individually, and in a European, in a national, in a global sense. And I think those 20, 25 years that lapsed everyone had subscribed to a reality that had been offered as if it were real. Now it's apparent that reality is much more complex. It's multifaceted. And definitely film Garrone's Reality really points that out. La Grande Bellezza definitely proposes that. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say, you know, that American audiences respond better for films that kind of recreate in their minds the Italian stereotypes and that basically, or the ideals, and that the example that you gave for the Grande Bellezza, the Great Beauty, is kind of a segue from this stylistic approach, even though when you look at it, it's all about Italian style, fashion, you know, the high life in Rome, everything that people, you know, immediately, you know, from the entertainment perspective, tend to connect easier.
Yeah, certainly. So, but you know, there's a whole other discourse underneath that maybe is lost to North American audiences, which is what Tony Servillo's character is a critique of that whole system. Of this grande bellezza on the outside, we see the beautiful city, but this supposedly grande bellezza of that lifestyle is all false. It's all very flat. And so the whole critique of that period, that's exactly what the transition is. It's a political critique of the times of the last 25, even 30 years that I think was important, and I think that's possibly why Italians didn't react as positively to this film as others did.
Maybe there's some shreds of what you know, used to be the hallmark of commedia all'italiana, the Italian comedy, you know, which is a bitter criticism. It's funny, but there is some bitter truth to it.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I think it just hit a few nerves.
Great. So I think, you know, in our journey tonight, we started in the past, your life in Naples. We talked about the, you know, the present, the state of Italian cinema today. And we'd like to close with questions about the future, and I'll turn it over to Laura.
Yeah, Pasquale, what makes Italian cinema so unique for you? Like, you know, the Italian brand is always loved all over the world, and but also the Italian cinema. So what is about that makes it so unique compared to the United States? And for someone who never saw any Italian movie, can you mention 2 or 3 movies that he should watch to understand something of this particular fascinating cinema?
Yeah. Well, I think this sort of comes out of the last question and answer. That I think Italian cinema really flourishes and blossoms in periods of crisis. Italians respond. It might take them a while, but they respond well. It took them 20 years under fascism, it took them another 20 years under Berlusconi, but eventually something happened.
Well, the Italians have the ability, we have the ability of doing that, reacting at the very bottom line, reacting with the most genius, and you know, something comes out from our creativity, from the nothing. From actually, it's a big motivation for us. I don't know why.
I think that's why nationalism in Italy doesn't necessarily work. It's because people in the end know that they have to depend on themselves and respond really well to that, and all the artistry, creativity, and imagination emerges. So if there's a lot of pressure from the outside that's pushing in one direction, eventually they'll respond with really creative ways to undo that pressure. And I think cinema is one of the arts where it really emerges. And Italian culture is really visual. It seems almost banal to say that, looking at the art history and Italy's art history, it's a very visual culture. So film lends itself to that expression through crisis. So there might not be always a sustained production. You might have ups and downs. There will always be some good films being made, and it'll find ways to then pop up and manifest in a new dress. It'll come out with that. So
you think this is part of this fascination also compared to the United other cinemas, other countries?
Do I think it's a fascination?
No, I mean, you think that that's also why the Italian cinema is so fascinating and so special compared to other countries' cinema production?
Yeah, because it just when you think it's down, it comes up again. And I think it always comes up.
I agree.
There's also something that I'm kind of curious what you think is the Italian cinema soundtrack is always on a league of its own. It's always sometimes even bringing a bad movie to new heights. So I'm kind of wondering.
No, that's true. Yeah, and of course there are old standbys that help do that as far as writers. Yeah.
Nice. So can you just recommend these 3 movies that?
I think any movie that I recommend would chase people away, but I'll try.
You can try. How about this? You give us, your personal choices and the one that you think the audience would respond to.
So I'll, there's so many. It's really hard to bring it down to 3, but I would.
Yeah, I mean,
if any, I would go to. If we want an older one, I would go to maybe Fellini, either Nights of Cabiria or La Strada, for one of the classics. Definitely Una giornata particolare.
Interesting.
Beautiful film. And also because it has 2 stars, Marcello Mastroianni and Sofia Loren, who are well known all over the world, but they're playing against their usual.
That's a very interesting choice.
Yeah, it's a period piece.
And then maybe Bertolucci, and again here's a different film for him as well, definitely from the newer films, is The Conformist, which again plays, looks back in time and looks and plays with imagination, dream, flashbacks, and all the rest. They're not none of these films I would call mainstream. They all have they're all social commentaries.
Yeah.
They're political, they're entertaining, they're fascinating, they're beautiful, there are lots of emotion in all 3 of them. And
but now you have to pick one of the year 2000.
Of the 2000s?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love reality. But then I almost anything with Tony Servillo in it,
Yes, you're right, totally right.
Was fantastic, Lee was fantastic. Reality is great. Like Bellezza. Tony Servillo is a wonderful one, and some of the smaller.
And not to mention it's Napolitan, no?
Yeah,
of course.
Everybody falls in there, no?
Yeah,
Tony
in a way, that's one of the
Paolo Sorrentino.
crises is exactly that. That in the early 90s, I Vesuviani, Mario Martone, Antonietta De Lillo, these filmmakers, Capuano, I Vesuviani made this film anthology, and film in Naples and in the South started to emerge as one of the new paths to follow in the early 90s. And again, that's a crisis situation, the North-South, the South in Europe, the economic crisis in the South, La Questione Meridionale, and all the rest. So all these people emerged during that time, and have been able to then work their way into to represent also Italian film. So I realize there are many other filmmakers from other parts. I would like to mention people like, for example, I think today documentary filmmaking is extremely important.
Yeah.
Definitely on par with the so-called feature films. So someone like Andrea Segre, his documentaries on migration, and then his I guess fiction films like Io sono lì. It's a wonderful film that is still concerned with migration, relations with new immigrants to Italy. A new film that we showed here, and I saw in Bologna, Dagmawi Ymer's film on Va Pensiero, on the situation of African immigrants in Italy. Marco Bertozzi, who also came to San Diego, who's one of the main documentary filmmakers and theoreticians today in Italy. Manuele Cecconello from the north, from Torino, who's done a number of documentaries about rural life. Stefano Missio, who I'm not quite sure where, I think he's from Verona, who's made a number of documentaries, also going back and rescuing things from archives like Bertozzi does, and looking at Luce archives and how those things can be represented, reproposed today in a different light. Because of course the Luce archive was very ideologically founded by Mussolini and the fascists as a heavy ideological weight. How can we make use of those materials today in a different way? So just a few names thrown out there, and yeah, that's all.
Yeah, interesting. No, this is fascinating. I mean, some of the stuff that you mentioned, I don't know about these names, and others, of course, are really household names. And one thing that's kind of interesting also is that this tendency, you've probably seen this, as early as the 50s and 60s, that directors that are not native to a specific location,
right?
Like Pietro Germi, that had the fascination with Sicily, or you look at Emanuele Carliese, the same deal. Is a Roman that find his great interest in making films in Sicily.
Right.
This outsider perspective is adding a lot than the native point of view.
Yeah, and internally, I think it's a question of that age-old problem of the Southern question that led a lot of filmmakers in the 50s to go to the South and film those backward places to try and introduce them to a more general public, but also went to the North. Di Gianni, for example, is a filmmaker who worked in both the North and the South, in very small locations, in towns in the North and in the South, to show that this tradition was still alive, that it wasn't completely lost, that modernism hadn't completely overwhelmed. And those are very interesting things that the Cineteca in Bologna is working very hard to bring out in special editions and reintroduce these productions. Very short films. Most of them are like about 9-10 minutes long, because that was the funding that was given to filmmakers in the 50s and 60s from the government to make short films, especially anthropological, ethnographic films, to preserve what they thought at the time was vanishing. And so a great archive exists all over of these short documentaries that people, as I said, Missio, Bertozzi are recuperating and trying to reintroduce, and the Cineteca in Bologna is at the forefront. There's a good site, doc.it, which has, I think, has an online archive of a lot of documentaries in Italy, which is you might be interested in seeing.
Yeah, I'd love to
That's
see that.
very interesting. So one thing I want to underline about this interview is that what Pasquale mentioned, I think it's very important, that is the Italians really have the ability from the worst position, from the crisis and from the situation, the worse they get, the better they react in a way, producing really, when there is nothing to lose, that we touch the bottom, then it's only time to come up. And this is very true. As an Italian, I can say it's really true. We work better under pressure when we have nothing to lose. Yeah.
It's a human response, of course, but we tend to do it.
But yeah, we tend to do as a as a regular regular thing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pasquale. That was very, very interesting perspective, and I enjoyed all the charging, and thank you.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot today, about a variety of aspects, both from, putting even a tiny flashlight to some of your experiences growing up in Naples, and what it was like, and then moving towards the present, how films, some of the challenges facing films today, and it was really a way for us to kind of open up the eyes for other viewers that might be considering Italian cinema, or sometimes, there is this pushback where people hate to watch films with subtitles, so it could be a turnoff, and I see it completely, the opposite. This is a way to look at the reality with fresh new eyes, and really, it's nice sometimes to put cultural glasses and see the world through different lenses. Yeah. So we really want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. And
thank you.
I know I learned a few things today. And thank you, Laura, for participating today as well.
Thank you, Shlomi. Thank you, Pasquale.
And for those of you viewers that are watching us now, and for those of you viewers that are watching us after the fact, you can definitely, we're going to post this interview on our YouTube channel, and as well as links from our blog. And feel free to share it on your networks, tweet it. Our hashtag is Cafe Pellicola Live. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao, Pasquale.
Ciao.
Grazie.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.